For some time now, you've probably been hearing that Ukraine's spring counter-offensive is on the way, and it's just possible that it could change, well, everything. In my garden, I have seen daffodils give way to tulips, which have now given way to lupins, which are generally the sign that spring is in its advanced stage and about to give way to the joys of summer. So that would suggest that the spring counteroffensive must by now be poised, ready to go. And indeed it seems to be, from what signs we can glean from the information and indeed the misinformation streams that we try to make sense of. What's becoming more and more evident, though, is just how high the stakes are for what happens over the next couple of months. And we've seen evidence of this with Ukrainian President Zelensky doing a tour in recent weeks, visiting his major allies, lining up the extra short-term support that he is going to need to make it possible to go on a counter-offensive, knowing that the ammunition and the hardware is coming in a steady stream to where it's needed. He knows that the stalemate of the last few months has to be broken, that Ukraine's allies need to believe that Ukraine can win the war on the battlefield and that therefore it's worth continuing their support. And there's a deadline on all of that, somewhat aligned with the next US presidential election. It's not unreasonable to presume that in the event of a second Trump term in the White House, or maybe even a DeSantis term, the effect would be to lose America's support, or at least its wholehearted support. So while it might suit Putin to hope for a long protracted war of attrition, you can't imagine that's how it seems to Ukrainians. The open question is whether the counteroffensive has already begun, because it's by no means obligatory on Ukraine to suddenly raise a flag and say, "Here we go, this is it, right now, pay attention." The Economist analysed satellite data this week and said that the evidence on the ground was that Ukraine has started turning up the heat over the last couple of weeks. Over that time, 907 fires likely to be war-related have been observed in Russian-held Ukraine territory, which is more than 4 times the number seen in the previous fortnight. And this goes across the front line from Kharkiv to Kherson, and with apparent strikes to the rear of Russian forces as well. The last time this was seen, according to The Economist, it was in the run-up to Ukraine's surge in the south that took place last autumn. Now that's not to say that the main phase has started yet. There's no evidence so far of a large Ukrainian advance, but the activity is consistent with laying the groundwork for that to take place, probing the Russian lines for weaknesses, hitting command posts and logistics to degrade its capacity to respond. This, of course, also takes place as another notable event was recorded, the attack on Belgorod. An incursion into a Russian region bordering Ukraine, exactly the sort of thing that gets Ukraine's allies feeling rather nervous. Belgorod prompted Biden's administration to distance itself once again from such tactics, saying that they do not encourage attacks on Russian soil, certainly do not want such attacks to be made using any American-made equipment. But it's also the sort of thing that is pretty much inevitable. If you invade an immediate neighbour, you will not be able to keep all of the consequences off your own territory. And it's in any case inevitable because any scenario that sees the conflict end in Ukraine's favour increasingly strongly relies on a specific chaotic process, namely the collapse of order within Russia. Both short-term Ukrainian success on the battlefield and daring strikes into Russia's own territory makes that outcome more likely to take place. The point is that whatever Russia's strengths or weaknesses on the battlefield, it would be astonishing if a situation at the heart of power in Moscow were not considerably more fragile now than it has been for many years. the increasingly public slanging match between different factions, some of whom in blatant disrespect to Putin and those around him. That is a symptom of a fight that's already being carried out in expectation of the post-Putin era. Not that it means people necessarily expect that to arrive tomorrow. But, Putin is in his 70s. He is currently not being highly effective. Sooner or later, that post-Putin scenario is clearly going to come into play. And given the deep divisions between the different groups, they all see that process as one of being life or death for them. The Russian investigative journalist Roman Anin was asked by Radio Free Europe what each group was trying to achieve. And he said this: they want to save their lives, assets, the lives of their relatives. They understand that after Russia loses the war, because nobody among them believes in the victory anymore, they understand that it will be the starting point of this battle for the throne. And the one who loses the battle will lose everything. So then it matters, who are the people in contention? What is likely to happen should whichever of them triumph? Realistically, there seem to be three groups with different agendas and degrees of influence who might succeed. There's the people around Putin, currently the current elite, if you will. There's a more wild and savage group made up of people like Wagner Group's Prigozhin. And then there's a third group of nationalists who want to remove incompetent elites but also want desperately to win the war. Yes, sorry, Navalny's liberal-minded opposition doesn't feature in any of these scenarios. I report how it seems to be, not how I wish it were. Arguably, and Anin makes the case in his interview, the best outcome would be that Putin is succeeded by one of the current existing elites, the Friends of Putin. Now, these are not more enlightened leaders in waiting. They have thrived in the time of Putin by embracing all of the corruption and all of the criminal activities. But people respond to incentives. And it would arguably in this group's interest to end the war, give security guarantees to Ukraine in return for similar from the West, and the cancellation of sanctions. The West is almost certainly weary enough of the war to wholeheartedly buy into that if offered by a post-Putin leadership. And that would end up being the best outcome for Russia and for the world. The problem is that those elites are bitterly divided amongst themselves. So one thing they don't present is an obvious successor. What you see is competing claims, no engagement or favouritism from Putin himself, and potentially true destructiveness that will rip the group apart. So the likes of National Guard Director Viktor Zolotov, who was close to Putin for some years, he is daggers drawn with FSB Director Alexander Bortnikov. They hate each other, are unlikely to ever agree on a successor. Whoever wins out, the other can expect to lose all their assets, maybe their life. If you're in that position and you see the current leader gradually bleeding power, how long are you going to wait? Knowing that if you get caught on the back foot by events, that may well be the end of you. And the other groups are demonstrating that whatever else is happening, Putin is indeed bleeding power. So the increasingly loud and combative public statements by Yevgeny Prigozhin, the Wagner Group head, who's arguably the only Russian figure you could say has had a good war. He has been aggressively attacking Putin's defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, amongst others, equally aggressively attacking Chechen head and Putin ally Ramzan Kadyrov, and even increasingly transparently, albeit with some rather thin disguise, attacking Putin himself. So far, in a country where a wrong word can land you in jail, he has been able to do that with impunity. Indeed, he even hinted in a recent video where he announced that Wagner Group would leave Bakhmut on the 10th of May, that after that point, now the 1st of June, a new project might soon be in order. He said, "We will leave on the 10th of May and we will wait until the Russian people need us, which we believe is going to happen really soon if you look at how our leaders are acting." Kinda sounds like the promise of a coup or a revolution or something. I mean, I don't imagine he had in mind that they would start blocking traffic and gluing themselves to buildings. Positioning the Wagner Group as the militia at the service of the Russian people, against the wishes and the interests of their leaders. It's pretty incendiary stuff. And the thing is, Prigozhin is a consummate PR man. Many Russians have accepted the line that Wagner has been the only competent force in the war, and when they have failed, it was because the Russian state military starved them of ammunition. I mean, it couldn't get much more blatant. Telling Russians that the elites like Shoigu have been shielding their own sons from the war, while their sons, all of them, have been coming home in coffins. If Putin were in a position of strength, Prigozhin would likely be dead by now. Clearly, Putin is not in a position of strength. He took the decision to start the war, believing it to be an easy victory for the picking, an operation that would be completed within 3 days. It turned into a war that he cannot win. He apparently has no plan for how to navigate his way out of that eventuality. He has factions around him fighting for supremacy, for what will come after his reign is at an end, and he has no idea how to deal with that either. So now the post-Putin scenarios could well be worse. Someone like Prigozhin comes to power, and he's by no means the only powerful, crazy person in the mix, then the West has a real problem on its hands. But for Ukraine, there is no way through this terrible war that doesn't see Russia moving into the inevitable next step of meltdown and chaos. It will lose Ukraine if it is unsuccessful on the battlefield and kept in its position of stalemate until it loses the support of its most important ally, the United States. So while uncertainty and chaos will be a huge part of the fallout, Ukraine only expects to win by taking actions that will advance that chaos one way or another. If they win the war, the chaos will follow. So much better then that they bring the chaos forward and see if it becomes the means of bringing the resolution of the war forwards as well. So yes, there will be more incursions onto Russian territory. Whatever they might calculate will add to the steaming pressure cooker that is the Kremlin right now. And there will be a major push on Ukraine to make one or preferably more significant advances on the battlefield to show real momentum. Again, to bring the chance of chaos forward. The one thing that's become increasingly obvious is that success for Ukraine will not signal the end of the crisis Russia has posed to the existing world order. It might even just be the beginning. Either way, the rest of 2023 is going to be a lot more important than most commentators are crediting right now. Watching this video. If you liked it, please share with anyone else you think would also enjoy it. Word of mouth is really important to us. And if you've not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? As the saying goes, that subscribe button won't smash itself.